Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to round 5 of the Alfa Romeo Touring Car UK Championship. We are here at Brands Hatch this evening, Brands Hatch being the randomly selected track for us to enjoy for round 5 of this championship. With the Giulietta TCR, always a very fun car to watch navigate this British circuit. Of course, they can get up to a fairly immense speed actually at this bit that we're on now, on board with Steve Knight. The Pilgrims drop, but you do have to watch out for that back end around the likes of Surtees, or I'd say Graham Hill Bend, and then Surtees. You really have to watch out for the lockup. The lockup seems to be quite common here, and you want to make sure you're not carrying too much speed heading into Stirlings as well, because we've seen time and time again you can end up in a bit of trouble, as Steve Knight very nearly did then. The back end is stepping away from him there. He did a very good job of keeping hold of it and is able to carry on, but it will not be a fairly a competitive lap, but I don't believe it was anyway. I believe we're currently on an out lap with Steve Knight. Just to give you a quick update on the qualifying session for this evening then. It is John Cole who leads with a 1:30.2. He's not on the timing tower yet, but as soon as he is, we will join on board with him, see how he is doing in this session. Then we have Will Inglis in P2 with a 1:30.4, so very close at the front end of the field. Then Alan Matthews with a 1:30.4 as well. We're going to go on board with him actually, as he doesn't quite make the cut on that lap. Stays third fastest, unless Greg Young, the car challenging him at the moment, can put a bit of pace underneath him in the second and third sectors. He looks to be losing out towards the end of this end of the lap though, and we have just seen Matt Daly joining the session now. So late on in the session we have our appearance from Matt Daly, and he usually seems to put in a fairly competitive time, so we'll see what he can do at this moment in the game. Let's go on board actually with I was going to say go on board with Jack Hudson. We've gone on board with Rosie Hudson at the moment. Rosie currently in P10 overall. Jack, her nearest rival. We can't go on board with him at the moment, unfortunately, but he is very close indeed on the super soft tyres, and we may be able to. I'm going to see if we can try and catch him somewhere. We've gone on board with Greg Young. Oh, there he is, just coming across the line, and I can tell you with three personal best sectors make that. It is an improvement for Jack Hudson into the low 1:34s. Unfortunately for him though, not close enough to get nearer to his sibling, as that is Will Inglis leaving the pit lane now, and we see that John Cole's actually at the moment on for a bit of a flyer. Purple first sector at 27.5 this time round, as he heads down onto the Pilgrims. Drop goes a little bit wide actually, and that will make him suffer throughout the rest of this lap. We have just over 8 minutes to go in this session now. So then starting on the lap with John Cole, he'll be wanting to try and avoid the errors that he made on the previous run. Steve Knight meanwhile has made some very nice progress indeed, has just set a personal best of 1:32.8 as we watch John Cole now head into Druids, one of the first major break, in fact the first major braking zone on one of the most important overtaking opportunities on the entire track. You've really got to play your cards right and set up the corner. It's actually a bit like Zandvoort actually, if you're watching the Formula 1 last weekend. That first hairpin bend, you've really got to play your cards right about how you enter the corner, because your initial instinct is to just defend the inside, but often it can be more beneficial to hang it around the outside there. So we'll have to see how the drivers deal with that in the racing coming up in just a few minutes time. Heading down the Pilgrims Drop now, top speed is about 138 miles an hour for John Cole at the moment. He is one of the quickest cars on track, kicking up a little bit of dirt in front of him. I believe that is the car of I can't tell you that is the car of Guy Swarbrick actually. Guy Swarbrick, I believe, is back up to fighting form and should be ready to get back into the racing action, which is good to see, as John Cole jumping up onto two wheels. This lap really hasn't gone the way that he would have wanted. No improvements to be found so far, unless he can string it together at the end of this lap. It will still be a pole at the moment, provisional pole for John Cole, but under a lot of pressure from the likes of Will Inglis, Alan Matthews, and we are yet to see a lap from Matt Daly, I believe, so we'll have to watch out for him as well. As we see Guy Swarbrick coming across the line there, I believe Guy Swarbrick does make an improvement. He goes 9th fastest with a 1:33.3, and there's an improvement at the end for John Cole as well, but unfortunately for him it's not enough, a 1:30.6 on that previous lap. who else do we have then navigating their way through this qualifying session? Well, I can tell you that Matt Daly has now started his flying lap. We can't go on board with him at the moment, unfortunately, but I'll try and see if there's a car near him that we can go on board with. And there is Barry Clayton, just see it in the background there, Matt Daly as well. Barry Clayton, another driver, improving towards the end of the lap on the previous attempt. And will be trying to set his best at the moment. Seems to be a bit of windscreen damage, I believe that is. So maybe that car not in fighting form for this qualifying session, which will be not ideal for him. We'll have to dive into the pits, and with 5 minutes to go in this session, he should still be able to get a couple of lap attempts in. And there we see Barry Clayton heading down the Pilgrim's Drop with Matt Daly following close behind. I can tell you that Will Inglis has actually just set a purple sector through the final lap, so everyone really starting to pick up the pace now in the final sector. Maybe it's a confidence thing or the track just getting greener. For whatever reason, the final sector seems to be with all the differences being made at the moment. Will Inglis extending his lead, I believe, by 200ths of a second, so very close indeed, but a 1:30.43 now being Will Inglis' best lap so far. There we see once again Matt Daly just in the distance there, but we are on board with Barry Clayton at the moment, improving through the second sector. Actually, he's got a 1:33.2 to beat as we see him head through the Clark curve now, running down towards the start line. It's not really start-finish straight, there's barely any straight parts of it. Barry Clayton does improve there to, no he doesn't rather, Matt Daly puts an absolute flyer in, a 1:30.3. that puts him second in this session so far, less than a tenth of a second behind John Cole with a purple final sector and obviously personal bests in 1 and 2. What an absolutely blistering start to his qualifying push for Matt Daly. That is a fantastic lap from him. That puts him pretty clear, I'm using that in relativity, to Will Inglis, and then John Cole is about 7/10 of a second, or 700th of a second ahead rather. So we'll see when we can go aboard with Matt Daly. Matt Daly losing out for the first sector actually, which is not what he wants to see, but still making very good progress regardless. Heading through the first sector to 27.7, I can tell you. Will Inglis improving through the final sector once again, trying to get ever closer to Matt Daly rather, but he just doesn't seem to have the pace at the start of the lap. That seems to be the distinguishing factor, I would say, is can you really put together something like Sector 2 at this point in time? Sector 3 seems to be getting better for everyone on track now, as we're going to go aboard actually with Greg Young. Greg Young, 1:30.6 puts him P5 on the road at the moment, but he's improving as this lap continues. A personal best of a 27.7 through the first sector, 24.6 for the second sector. Now we only have the run down towards Stirling's coming up in just a second, and before we have the infamous Clark curve. Clearway's coming up first, and that is a rather sketchy way to get head your way onto Clearways rather, if I can get my words out right. Stirling's providing some difficulties for Greg Young there before we head down through the Clark curve and back onto the Brabham straight now. It's a 1:30.1 to beat for Greg Young. Matt Daly going personal best, and that's a pole for Matt Daly as well, but Greg Young does improve, I believe. No, he doesn't. A 1:30.6 still being his best time at the moment. And so, what an absolutely flying lap for Matt Daly. We can now go on board with him as he improves through the first sector, actually, so we might stay on board with him, see if he can crack into the 1:29s even. That would be a very impressive drive from him if he can do, as he headed through Surtees at the moment. He does have a bit of traffic up in front in the form of Alan Matthews and Steve Knight. He is gaining on them. I was thinking that they may be able to provide some form of slipstream on the way through the Pilgrim's Drop, but I think he was too far back for that to make any real difference. And of course, in these touring cars, it doesn't make the most difference. He does improve through the second sector though. It's a 24.5 through that middle sector of the circuit. So he's really nailing the parts of the track that some other drivers are struggling with at the moment. The car looking very planted, very composed actually. Hopefully the commentator's curse is about to come into effect as we head through Stirling's now. Looking absolutely in control is Matt Daly, in control of this qualifying session as well. We haven't seen that much of a gap at the front end of the field so far in this session. He's getting closer and closer to Alan Matthews up in front. That may compromise him just a little bit. He does go personal best through the first two sectors. This is the one now that could make the difference, put him in the 129s potentially. It is a 129.9 for Matt Daly. What an absolutely flying lap. Losing out actually through the final sector. It probably because his previous final sectors were so blistering, or maybe his front tyres starting to struggle just a little bit towards the end of the lap. But for whatever reason, it doesn't matter anyway, because with a personal best Sector 1 and Sector 2, Matt Daly improves his provisional pole with the 129.9. An absolutely flying lap from him. Who else at the moment then is looking to try and improve towards the end of this qualifying session? Well, John Cole will be wanting to. He's looked fairly comfortable or I say fairly comfortable, again using that term relatively. He has looked comfortable on the front end of the grid there with a 130.4 and is now sat in P2 owing to the improvements made by Matt Daly. Half a second Matt Daly now sits on provisional pole by. That is an absolutely flying lap from him. Matt Daly improves once again, actually. John Cole losing out through this lap, though. We are seeing Matt Daly lose out through the second sector as well. Is that due to the fact that he does have Steve Knight for company there? Some traffic in the way, potentially. They are side by side. They're going to bang wheels, make body contact, heading through, I believe that was Sheens or Dingledale, as we head now into Stirling's. There's potentially going to be even more contact, and that is a disaster for them towards the end of this qualifying session. Obviously, both drivers wanting to battle and try and get as much track position as they can, trying to make as many improvements in their lap time as they can, and that's all come to a head, all come to blows towards the end of this session. I don't think it's going to compromise Matt Daly's session too much, although he'll be annoyed that he hasn't had the chance to improve his lap. Likewise, Steve Knight, I'm sure, gutted that he isn't able to try and push higher up in the AM running, although he is already on provisional pole for the AM running. As we see Matt Daly now heading down through the first sector. Once again, only 30 seconds left on the timer, and we have an absolute barrage of cars now starting their final laps in this session. So we're going to go on board actually now with John Cole. John Cole, maybe even Will Inglis. No, Will Inglis should get another lap in. John Cole runs wide as we head through Surtees. That is commentator's curse if ever I've seen it. Apologies for that, John. As we see Alan Matthews, the next car to head through Surtees. He is in the mix for this pole, a 130.49. His best lap at the moment. Matt Daly actually enters the pits. So he has decided that's all he can do in this qualifying session, maybe all that he needs to do, and brings his qualifying session to an end there. So, competitors for this pole at the moment, then John Cole is pretty much out of it owing to, in fact he is out owing to that disaster at Surtees. Up next we have Alan Matthews, the car that we're on board with. He loses out through the first couple of sectors. Can the final sector make all the difference? We'll have to find out as he heads through Sheens now and down towards Stirling's. Stirling's has caught a couple of drivers out so far in this session, but it seems to be going well for Alan Matthews as he runs down clearways now. One of the largest straight sections of the circuit, I would say, after Pilgrim's Drop. Heading through the clock curve now, and you want to mash your foot down on the loud pedal as quickly as possible before you head down towards the start-finish straight. Or through the start-finish straight, rather. Coming across the line then, it is not an improvement for Alan Matthews then. What about Will Inglis? Coming up next we have Will Inglis. In fact, Greg Young, rather. I nearly missed Greg Young in all of this. Greg Young has a personal best through Sector 1. Has he run out of fuel? I think he's either ran out of fuel or decided to abandon the lap, unfortunately for him. We go on board then with Will Inglis as he heads down clearways. I believe there was another car actually heading through the Clark curve. That is Rosie Hudson. Is that Rosie Hudson? That is Hudson. And in fact, both of the Hudson siblings in the pits at the moment. Guy Swarbrick then comes across the line. What will it be for Guy there? A 133.3. His last lap, 132.2, was unfortunately for him null and invalid at the end there. But Will Inglis at the very end there, that lap wasn't looking too hot for him, but Sector 3, purple, a 37.6, sees him swoop past John Cole and take P2 in this session then. So it's a 130.1, sees Will Inglis sat on the first row of the grid, rather, at the very end there. That is a fantastic late charge for Will Inglis in this qualifying session, and shows that we should be looking forward to a very close battle at the front ends of the field in the upcoming races, so don't go anywhere. And we have just under 30 seconds to go until lights out. It is Matt Daly who sits on pole there. Will Inglis P2, John Cole P3, Alan Matthews P4. This should be a very exciting session indeed. We still have a couple of cars joining. Hopefully everyone can get on this fairly packed field actually in time for lights out. It is now 6 red lights on the gantry. And we are away. A puff of tyre smoke off the most of the cars there. And in the hammering, there has been a catastrophic collision between, I believe that is Rosie Hudson, Jack Hudson, and who else involved in that as well? I think that was James Atkins. I know that I'm wrong there, rather. It appears to be a bit of a muddle-up according to the time system. Actually, I'll try and work out who that was, who seemed to be caught up in a bit of unfortunate action. That doesn't matter anyway, because what matters is Matt Daly still leads, heading down towards Surtees in just a moment. A bit of a kick-up from the back end there. The car getting a little bit unsettled, but he still kept control of it. Brazilian's been traded as we headed through Druids there. Greg Young currently in P4. He's had a fairly decent start, but has a lot of pressure from behind from the likes of Alan Matthews, Nathan Birch as well. Meanwhile, only 0.2 of a second between Matt Daly, Will Inglis. Will Inglis, of course, benefiting from a little bit of a slipstream as we head down through the Pilgrim's Drop. The car's so low to the ground there as we head down through Hawthorne and the Derek Minter straight up in just a moment there. Tell you what though, Matt Daly doing a very good job of keeping those cars at bay for the moment. Will Inglis really has to play his cards right. Does he choose to go on the attack and try and catch Matt Daly, potentially make a mistake in doing that as well, or does he set focus on trying to keep John Cole behind? Because of course he doesn't want to slip up trying to get past Matt Daly. If they get stuck in a battle and start slowing each other down, that is the perfect position for John Cole to be in. There's a bit of a gap forming up between the likes of John Cole and Greg Young now as Guy Swarbrick is able to join the session, but Greg Young very much under pressure from Alan Matthews. I believe that it was potentially about to be an overtake from John Cole on Will Inglis, but that wasn't to be. Was it to be at the bottom of the Paddock Hill bend there? I think it was, because I believe Will Inglis has caught some gravel, unfortunately for him. He drops down to P6 now and is back in the midfield. What a shame for him. Let's see how hopefully he can recover. Meanwhile, John Cole in P2, about a second behind Matt Daly. This is going to be redemption for him for qualifying after sitting so comfortably on provisional pole. It was taken away from him, not through any fault of Matt Daly's, not through any fault of, but it was just taken away from him due to Matt Daly's impressive pace. But he wants to fight back for it, I am sure. Meanwhile, Jack Hudson getting ahead of James Atkins and Barry Clayton, because there has been a bit of a disaster there. I'm not sure what happened. I believe it was just a racing incident between the two heading through Surtees that sees them dropping way back through the field. Now disaster at the start of the race for those drivers. Meanwhile, Alan Matthews in P4 then. He's backed off a little bit from Greg Young. Greg Young could be in quite an interesting position here actually if he plays his cards right, because if he can keep Alan Matthews behind, Alan Matthews pretty much gives up on the attack. He may not be able to keep up with John Cole, Greg Young, but he could find himself in a very comfortable position here, quietly running in P3 if all things go well for him, and you never know, if something happens further up the road, he could find himself on a higher step on the podium as well. So all to play for these drivers, although Alan Matthews seems to be a little bit closer towards the end of this lap, and that is corroborated by the lap times from the previous lap. They're pretty much identical, but that final sector for Alan Matthews was 0.4 of a second faster, so Alan Matthews seemed to be very comfortable towards the end of this high-speed circuit. It is a surprisingly high-speed circuit for a traditional British circuit. It is about as narrow as you would expect, though. Can make overtaking tricky for some parts of the circuit, but other parts are certainly a fun challenge for some overtaking there, like the likes of Druids. You also have Surtees as well, Graham Hill Bend, and then Stirling's is your next opportunity before I'd say maybe Clark Curve if you're feeling particularly brave, but potentially it's better to wait for Druids. Paddock Hill Bend as well if you are feeling very brave indeed. We've seen it work for some drivers, but more often than not we see it go wrong for some drivers as well. John Cole, meanwhile, hasn't caught up ever so slightly to Matt Daly. Matt Daly still up front, setting purple sectors, about 0.7 of a second now separating these two cars. I'd just like to give mention to the compounds used by the drivers, everyone on the soft compound tyre. We did see in qualifying a couple of drivers sprouting up with the super soft, but everyone has deemed the soft the best tyre to be running on in this longer race, apart from Steve Knight. Steve Knight running the medium compound tyre, so he's hoping for a bit of a pace advantage potentially towards the end of the race, which is certainly not a bad strategy, as Matt Daly there diving to the side of the circuit to set himself up for the Paddock Hill bend coming up there, setting a 1:30.1 as he does so. In fact, a very impressive lap time indeed. Locking up though, heading into Druids. It was, I believe it was the Giulietta TCRs a couple of seasons ago now that Matt Daly was in lock-up heaven at Brands Hatch, it must be said. Every single corner seemed to be a substantial lock-up, but it didn't seem to affect pace at all. It just seemed to be the fastest way for him to get around this circuit. As we see John Cole running a little bit wide there, will that compromise his charge on Matt Daly ever so slightly? He has backed off just a little bit now, 1.2 seconds as we head down the Pilgrim's Drop. We see Greg Young also heading down the Pilgrim's Drop, very much under pressure from Alan Matthews, though that gap that had slightly built up between the two has closed up once again, and now Alan Matthews very much believes this fight is on. If we compare their previous lap times for Alan Matthews, it is a 1:30.9 on the previous lap and a 1:30.8 for Greg Young. Their best laps being those 2 laps as well. A little bit of air time for the back end of Greg Young's car before we head down into Stirling to lock up as well. Alan Matthews is so on him here. They are now side by side as we head down Clearways, and in fact that is no longer side by side. That is now Alan Matthews in P3. An impressive charge from him as we head into the Clark Curve. Now Greg Young very much not giving up this fight yet though, as we head down onto the Brabham Straight once again. Only I would say a couple of tenths of a second before we get to the end of the straight. Greg Young losing time at the end of the lap there. That is a very impressive time. We have a 1:30.000 for Matt Daly, and then for Nathan Birch a 1:31.000. Never have I seen such clean lap times in a race session before. That is very impressive to see indeed. As we go back on board with Greg Young then, only 0.4 of a second separating these two now, but he wants to play his cards right here. Does he choose to back off and maybe recharge those tyres, recollect his thoughts and get ready for a push against Alan Matthews later on in the race, or does he try and fight for it now? If he tries to fight for it now, he wants to ideally stay within that half a second range. It stays within the half a second range. It does get more difficult to get the overtake done. That final half a second is more difficult, but he does stay within overtaking distance if something goes wrong for Alan Matthews, or he stays within that slipstream as well within that half a second range. Obviously doing that does put a bit of wear through the tyres, so he has to watch out for that. He is doing a good job of it so far though, as we go back on board with John Cole actually, who is doing a good job of keeping pace with the car in front as well. About a second separating these, so we saw that gap at about 1.2 seconds. We've seen it as low as 6 or 7/10 of a second, but he seems to be fairly calm at 9/10 of a second at the moment. As we go back on board with Nathan Birch then, Nathan Birch very much in quite a comfortable position here. He's P5 on the road at the moment. Is about 3 seconds down on Greg Young, those two battling in front, but more importantly is, I believe, about 9 seconds ahead of, in fact make that 11 seconds ahead of the likes of the AM runners there. One thing to note though is if something does happen between Alan Matthews and Greg Young, of course those two do know how to battle each other, they have done so on many occasions beforehand. Nathan Birch will soon find himself potentially with a spot on the podium. He runs a little bit wide through the Graham Hill bend there. That seems to be a bit of a favourite for the drivers. You can just carry so much speed if you run onto the concrete. I don't know what to call that surface actually. I know there's a name for it, and I did make the effort to learn it at one point, but I have since forgotten the name of that kind of concrete grid surface. I came across it a lot during my karting days, which makes you sound very old. That was only a year ago. My karting days were you would really be quite uncomfortable to run onto that concrete grid arrangement there. But a bit more comfortable in these Giulietta TCR cars, but we see Nathan Birch doing a very good job indeed at the moment. As we go back on board with Greg Young then, that gap building up ever so slightly. He may have to rethink this charge against Alan Matthews for the time being and choose to push later on. Meanwhile, in the AM running, there is a bit of a battle going on actually, or correction there. There's a battle going on between Steve Knight and Amrunner, and we have Barry Clayton as well. Now, theoretically, as an Amrunner, Steve Knight should allow Barry Clayton past there, but I'm sure these two would much rather enjoy a bit of a battle, which is what we like to see, as James Atkins actually has found his way up into P9. No, he hasn't. There's just been a small glitch there, but Barry Clayton in P10 on the road at the moment. He wants to try and find a way past the likes of Steve Knight, and I believe that is Rosie Hudson there. He wants to try and find a way past Steve Knight so he can catch up to the likes of Rosie Hudson and start to battle with the pro runners, the likes of Will Inglis in P7 on the road at the moment, but he isn't able to do so just yet. He's got a bit of work to do before that as we head into the Paddock Hill Bend. These two still very close indeed. It's been some impressive pace actually from Steve Knight so far in this session. His best lap at 1:33.7, and that is quite good when you consider the medium tyres on his car. He's a few tenths down on his running peers, but later in the race they should really start to come into their own. It'll be interesting to see how that develops for him as we see Barry Clayton now finds a way past. Meanwhile, James Atkins running in P11, and then we have Guy Swarbrick in P12 as well. Trading positions then, I believe, once again, Steve Knight has found a way back past at Surtees before we head down the Pilgrim's Drop once again. So this must be quite frustrating for Barry Clayton. He knows that as a pro runner he should be battling with the likes of Will Inglis, Nathan Birch, but unfortunately for him it just hasn't happened in this race so far. He may be setting his sights on the reverse grid race coming up in just a few minutes time in the second half of the broadcast. And at this stage it seems appropriate to give a bit of a brief update on the championship running as we go on board with Matt Daly. Matt Daly, who hasn't had too much screen time so far, obviously owing to how much of a pleasant time he's had at the start of this race. The gap to John Cole now standing at about 2 seconds. In fact, the gap between Barry Clayton and James Atkins, speaking of gaps, has shrunk quite considerably. I say there's going to be a bit of a pro race battle going on here, so that'll be enjoyable to see how James Atkins and Barry Clayton negotiate that. Meanwhile, out in front, Matt Daly just setting purple sectors as he continues on. That is very impressive indeed. 13 minutes into the race, we're at half race distance. Of course, the fuel load getting lighter, but the tyres wearing out and the drives wearing out as well. But we will give a brief mention of the championship standings as they stand heading at the moment in race 1. It is Matt Daly on 183 points who leads, a fairly substantial lead at that as well, about 1.5 seconds clear of John Cole, and a good few points in the championship standings as well. John Cole then P2 on the road at the moment. He is in P3 in the standings on 84 at the moment. Then we have Alan Matthews, P3 on the road, P2 in the standings, so a bit of a role reversal there. Currently on 132 points is Alan Matthews in second in the championship. Then we go and see that there has been a trade for positions further down the field. That is between Barry Clayton, Steve Knight and James Atkins. Barry Clayton's found his way past Steve Knight. James Atkins hasn't just yet, and that is a bit of a disaster for James Atkins. He wants, of course, there to be pretty much clear running between him and Barry Clayton so he can try and catch up, but every second he spends the time behind Steve Knight, rather, that allows Barry Clayton to romp away pretty much as he heads down clearways. That gap builds up. Steve Knight acting as a bit of a barrier between James Atkins and Barry Clayton there, as we see Greg Young meanwhile setting personal best sectors as he continues on. So we mentioned maybe he's recharging for later in the race. That could be what is going on here. I just want to also have a look at what's going on between Will Inglis and Jack Hudson here. The gap standing at about 0.3 of a second as we head down through Surtees now. And it is very close indeed between these drivers. Will Inglis wants to try and find a way past so he can maybe catch up to the likes of Nathan Birch towards the end of this race. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he wants to enjoy a bit of a battle with Jack Hudson. Jack Hudson doing a very impressive job in the Amring at the moment. There is Will Inglis's overtake on Jack Hudson. Has he got it to stick yet? He's ahead for now, but I imagine Jack Hudson's potentially going to try a bit of a move heading into Westfield if he's close enough, but unfortunately for him it doesn't look like he is. So there is Will Inglis now up to P6 on the road. Jack Hudson, of course, our AM championship leader at the moment. So impressive pace from him at the moment. In fact, if we compare the lap times, Will Inglis his best at 1:30.7, very fast indeed. Jack Hudson's at 1:32.5, pretty much matched by his previous lap attempt there. So Will Inglis has the upper hand in terms of pace, and that is shown now towards the end of the lap. He's about a second ahead already. But we go back to the championship standings at the moment. Andrew Brammer not with us this evening, unfortunately. Currently P5 on 60 points. Nathan Birch is P4 on 66 points. Currently P5 in this race. And then we have... who do we have next? We have Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton, P9 on the road at the moment. He is on 53 points. 52 rather. Just one behind Greg Young on 53. There's a bit of a battle going on between James Atkins and Steve Knight, actually. So we're going to go on board with them as we head through the Paddock Hill Bend. It's very brave if you want to try and get a move done there. Luckily, these drivers think better of it. But around the outside, James Atkins is going to try and go late on the brakes. Will that work? No, he's too far back, unfortunately for him. He's going to have to be just that ever so more brave if he wants to try and make that stick. He's got his next opportunity coming up at Surtees. Before that, we have Hawthorne, or potentially how the run out of Surtees goes. Pilgrim's Drop as well. So the middle sector is going to be really quite important for James Atkins on this lap. He's about 3 seconds behind Barry Clayton now, with about 10 minutes to go in the race. If he really picks the pace up, if he gets past Steve Knight, he may be on for a bit of a battle later on. But he really needs to try and get this move done as quickly as possible if he wants to try and salvage something from this race. So far, though, Steve Knight stays ahead, runs a little bit wide actually on the exit of Hawthorne, and that brings him closer once again to James Atkins, heading down towards Westfield. These two oh so close now. Of course, we have the two right-handers of Dingledale and Sheens coming up, Westfield included as a right-hander, although it is, I'd say that is two separate corners if Dingledale is considered its own corner. A very interesting end to Sector 2 actually. It really doesn't look like that much of a challenge, but it can be for some of the drivers. It's only really the quicker cars that seem to not think too much of it, and especially if you're in the midst of battle as well, it really becomes quite challenging. As we see now, near enough side by side for these two. Steve Knight just about staying ahead though. I just want to give mention to his setup at the moment. He's running quite high downforce by the looks of things. The slowest car in terms of straight line pace of anyone, and that is a disaster for James Atkins as he heads through the Paddock Hill Bend. He has fallen victim of quite a common ailment for certain drivers there, and that is running onto the gravel, trying to carry as much speed as possible, as I believe that is Guy Swarbrick trying to unlap himself there. What a disaster for James Atkins. As we go back on board with Nathan Birch, actually Greg Young dropping off somewhat from Alan Matthews now. Nathan Birch could find himself in the midst of battle for P4 in just a second if all things go well for him. Towards the end of this lap, he's only about 0.8 of a second behind at this stage in the race. If we compare the previous lap times, Greg Young's previous lap time 130.6, Nathan Birch 131.5, but they're about to update now and we'll see what their real pace is looking like. Very close together in terms of best lap pace. Nathan Birch carrying that very impressive 131 flat, very much flat 0.00, but we can tell you that Greg Young has had a bit of an instant on that previous lap, because it's a 137.5 compared to Nathan Birch's 131.8, so that has really made the difference now. That will spur Nathan Birch on just that little bit more to try and turn up the ante potentially, although he seems to be picking up the pace once again, is Greg Young. So then we see, in terms of championship standings as well, going back to our earlier exploration into that, Barry Clayton on 52 points, P7, Greg Young P6 on 53. Then we have, in this session, we have James Atkins, P9 in the championship at the moment, currently on 42 points. Willing Gliss has had a bit of a disaster. Not as much of a disaster as that, though. James Atkins going wide at Paddock Hill Bend once again, dropping further back. Willing Gliss currently on 32 points in P10. He has not had the most luck in this series. That is the least to be said there. He's currently on 32 points so far in P10. And then in the AM running, we already gave mention to him, but Jack Hudson currently leading the AM running, 143 points, doing a very impressive job at that as well. Paul Millman, unfortunately, not with us this evening, 118 points, P2. Then we have Rosie Hodson in P3, 103 points. And then we have Steve Knight, P4, 72 points. Rob Winnie also not with us this evening, unfortunately, on 58. And then Guy Swarbrick currently on 18 points, but trying to unlap himself as we speak. We go back on board then with Jack Hudson, who seems to be very much keeping Will Inglis honest. Will Inglis, I'm not sure if he had a bit of a disaster on the previous lap. We'll find out in just a moment's time as we head down the Graham Hill Straight. Made a corner there, made up a section of the track, rather, Brabham Straight. The Will Inglis at 138.8, so he's had a bit of an error on this previous lap, and it means that Jack Hudson has been able to catch right back up. The gap between them now standing at about a second again, so Will Inglis able to recover from that, but not ideal for him in this race. He was potentially hoping to catch up with the likes of Nathan Birch, but that hasn't happened, and he goes wide once again on the exit of the Graham Hill bend. That brings Jack Hudson closer once again in the final 5 minutes. I'm sure that he is just focused on trying to bring that car home now in the position that he's currently in. Meanwhile, I said this a few minutes ago, I'm going to say it again, we haven't looked at Matt Daly too much in this race, unfortunately for him and his sponsors, because he's been doing such a good job at the front end of the field. Currently in P1, as I just love the way that he sets the car up for the Paddock Hill bend there. It just looks like so much energy and dynamism in his car as he does that. Oh, so close to the track limits there as well, so close to the limits of the gravel as well, about 5 seconds clear of John Coles. Now he's absolutely controlled this race, controlled qualifying as soon as he got a fast lap in, and controlled race 1 as well. Let's see what he can do in the reverse grid race coming up in just a few minutes time. But we go back on board then with Will Inglis and Jack Hudson as they head down clearways now, about half a second between the two cars. And they are looking very close indeed. Will Inglis is going to have to play his cards right here, because we've seen, potentially due to tyre wear or maybe some damage on the car, that may explain the earlier lap time. He is struggling to keep the car on the track in some parts of the circuit, so he doesn't want to push too hard to keep Jack Hudson behind, because he may end up dropping back even more positions. But seems to be controlled at the moment as we head through Druids. That gap standing at about a second. Once again, here's where it went wrong for him on the previous lap. On the exit of the Graham Hill bend, he goes wide once again, but doesn't end up completely on the grass, which is much improved over the previous lap. Heading into Surtees now, he seems to be looking much more comfortable, so maybe a bit of an overheat event on the tyres that he's now brought back in control, and he seems to be much happier this time round. Going wide as we head through Westfield there, but still about a second and a half ahead of Jack Hudson this time round. Just want to have a look actually, who is the quickest man on track at the moment. I can't tell you that it is Matt Daly by a country mile, a 130.6 for Matt Daly. That would have been fairly competitive in the midfield in qualifying, so that is impressive to see. James Atkins is currently setting a personal best lap at the moment, so we may go on board with him and see how he is doing. In terms of outright straight line speed as well, it looks to be that Greg Young is on top, 137.7 miles an hour through the speed trap for Greg Young, currently sitting in P4. He seems to have broken away a little bit from Nathan Birch now. Seems to have brought the car back into a more comfortable window. He's been able to settle into a bit of a groove, and it's not a spot on the podium, unfortunately for him, but not all is lost in this race. A good haul of points on offer if he stays where he is at the moment. There's only 3 minutes to go in this session before the reverse grid race, where the grid order gets mixed around. It'll be very interesting to see how some drivers negotiate that. Something to turn the racing on its head, which is always good to see. As we go back on board with Matt Daly, then he is looking very much in control of this race. And in fact, it seems to be that all the drivers now settling into a bit of a rhythm and a bit of a groove. They've settled into a bit of a part of the circuit that they feel comfortable occupying, with no major challenges or charges from anyone else around them, as we bring this race towards a bit of a close in a minute. Still got a few minutes to go on the timing system, still a few laps to go, still anything could happen within this time. I believe that is James Atkins just up the road from Matt Daly there, so it may get a little bit confusing come time for lapping if such an event does come about towards the end of this race. We have the two very vibrant yellow liveried Juliettans, and I have mentioned it so many times in this season already. It's much like Andrew Brammer's debut when the Tartuses were about with the Earth Dreams inspired livery, but John Cole's livery, on the topic of liveries, absolutely fantastic, it must be said. That just looks so cool, really. I want that on my car, which on the Mitos you can pretty much get from the factory, so I may have to look into that. As we see Alan Matthews actually very quietly. We haven't heard too much from him so far in this race in that Chris Knott liveried car, Auto Italia liveried car, bringing that back on topic. But Alan Matthews has had an absolutely fantastic race, really, in P3 with no major challenges once he got past Greg Young. While his championship rival, his main championship rival, I would say, is Matt Daly, currently fairly clear in terms of points and extending his gap up in front. This is exactly the type of performance he needs to be setting in at this stage in the championship. If he can just keep consistently setting a good haul of points, or collecting a good number of points, this will bode well for his charge for the championship later on in the season. Likewise, for cars like the number 6 car, I don't believe what number is Will Inglis or Greg Young. What number is Greg Young, actually? The number 31 car, rather. I don't know why I said number 6. The number 31 car of Greg Young, results like this, although he may be disappointed without coming home without a spot on the podium, if he takes P4 in this race, it will bring him fairly clear of his nearest rival, Barry Clayton. Only a point between them at the moment, and we'll be interested to see how race 1 has affected the standings. We'll, of course, bring that update in race 2, but that is now the timer hitting 0. Where is Matt Daly on the circuit? We are now on the penultimate lap at the moment then, and I believe there has been a trade in positions. Has there? I'm not quite sure. No, there hasn't, but Alan Matthews, I thought for a second, was gifted P2 for a brief moment though, although it does seem to be that he is getting ever so slightly closer. Maybe John Cole's pace dropping off ever so slightly towards the end of this race, but for whatever reason, Alan Matthews seems to be really in quite a comfortable position in this race. I'm sure with a few more minutes he could have been getting ready for some exciting battles. Unfortunately for him, not to be the case. As we go back on board with Matt Daly, then I think we'll stay on board with him to give him the respect that he deserves out of what has been a fantastic drive throughout the weekend so far. Of course, we had the reverse grid race coming up yet, so unless he decides to go around the circuit in the wrong direction, going off-road and crashing everyone off on purpose, it will be a fantastic weekend. His driving standards have been impeccable so far. Heading through Druids then, no major challenges at all. Likewise, Graham Hill Ben. Let's see how Matt Daly does it. He does it exactly like we've seen so many other drivers driving onto that weird concrete gritty stuff, to give it its technical if someone watching could please, I know Google's right there, but if someone would like to remind me what that is called, like to remind my sieve of a brain what that is called, that'd be very much appreciated. I really should know that. As I say, I spent a lot of my karting days driving over it instead of on the black stuff, which is probably where I should have been. As we see the car bouncing through the Hawthorne bend, actually. So it means he's just clipped a sausage curb. I don't think there was actually a sausage curb there. Maybe the back end is getting a little bit upset, bouncing over those curbs. And actually, as we headed into Westfield, we're seeing pretty much off the circuit and bouncing into the air once again. This isn't going to be a personal best lap for Matt Daly, the final lap of the race, which is a shame, but it's good to see a bit of a Matt Daly masterclass once again. Heading through clearways then and into the clock curve for the final time in race 1. It has been a fantastic drive for Matt Daly. He's led from lap 1, dominated qualifying at the very end as well, and he's dominated race 1 too. Matt Daly takes the race 1 victory. What a fantastic drive from him so far, and hopefully for him it carries on as it has started this weekend. As we see John Cole then coming home to take P2 in the end. Unfortunately for him, after holding provisional pole in qualifying so far for so long, it wasn't to be in race 1, but I'm sure he's still very happy with P2 where he started in this race. He takes the second spot on the podium, round out the podium then Alan Matthews after a fantastic race 1 drive, it must be said. Greg Young as well, disappointment I am sure, but he can still be very happy with a decent haul of points in P4. Nathan Birch as well, taking home a good number of points in P5 with a flourish for a finish, and an interesting lockup for Will Inglis there. That is another favourite behaviour of the Giulietta TCR of mine, the back end locking up when it gets unloaded, but Will Inglis takes home P6, another good amount of points for him as well. And Jack Hudson will be taking the AM race victory. He has been in complete control, it must be said, extends his championship lead as well. An impressive drive from him. Rosie Hudson, with potentially some pressure from Barry Clayton if the race was just that little bit longer, will be coming home P2 in the AM running P8 on the road. Are we about to see some Matt Daly donuts Matt Daly always delivers on the donuts, but there is Rosie Hudson coming across the line to take P8, and there is Steve 9, P9 on the road. Rosie Hudson coming home P2 in the AM running, Barry Clayton P8, and then we have Steve Knight in a cloud of dust will be coming home P10, and Guy Strawberry classified P12, James Atkins classified P11, as all drivers making their way back into the pits. Getting ready for race 2, the reverse grid race, coming up in just a few moments' time as we see Steve Knight crossing the line to round out race 1's running. Well, race 1 certainly was interesting in terms of strategy, and it will provide for a very interesting race 2 as well. Race 2, the reverse grid race, we'll see how the drivers negotiate that. So join us in just a few moments' time when we get ready for the closing race of this weekend. And we're just under a minute to go until lights out now. We are lined up on the grid, ready for race 2, the reverse grid race. I can tell you that it is James Atkins and Barry Clayton lining up on the front row. Nathan Birch and Greg Young apparently on the second row, but I can tell you it appears to be Will Inglis and Nathan Birch on the second row. Then we have Greg Young, Alan Matthews, John Cole, Matt Daly, Guy Swarbrick, Steve Knight, Rosie Hudson, Jack Hudson, and Rob Whitney to round out the field. We had some issues with cars joining in race 1, I believe, but that all appears to be resolved now for race 2. So a few more cars are on the grid and in the race, which is good to see as we get ready for this reverse grid race. Now, hopefully a good launch for all the drivers. As the revs begin to rise, we do have 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away. Once again, another plume of tyre smoke there. James Atkins having a bit of torque steer by the looks of things. A very good getaway for John Cole there. He's looking up the inside of the Paddock Hill bend on Greg Young there. Wasn't able to squeeze past by the looks of things, so it's a decent start for James Atkins, it must be said. Will Inglis found his way up into P2. The inside there seems to be the ideal starting position for this race, it must be said. Greg Young working his way up into P3. A fantastic start for him. Barry Clayton as well, starting much better than race 1. Alan Matthews in P5 at the moment, and then Nathan Birch in P6. Guy Swarbrick, very good getaway for him. I believe Rob Whitney unfortunately had some further issues joining as well, which is a shame. But at the front end of the field, James Atkins leads this race for the first few corners. Will Inglis putting the pressure on though as we head down towards the Pilgrims drop. They are side by side, and I believe it is Will Inglis who had the better getaway out of Surtees, and there we see evidence of that. However, James Atkins does have the inside line there. Can he defend there? No, Will Inglis is late on the brakes. Enter the corner from the outside and take the position. A fantastic move from Will Inglis there. He now leads this race. Now James Atkins under pressure from Greg Young. We're going to have to watch out and see if he can keep Greg Young at bay. Of course, all this battling is just spurring these further cars on. We in fact have a train of cars getting ready to try and get some overtakes done. It hasn't been a dream start for Matt Daly. Actually, he's still running in P8 on the road, having a look up the inside of Guy Swarbrick there, but isn't going to be able to get the position from that corner. He's going to have to head down clearways now before we enter the Clark curve and think about where he's going to try and get the move done. If he's feeling particularly brave, he may get it done through the Paddock Hill bend. As we go on board with him, actually, meanwhile, at the front end of the field, positions being traded. It is Greg Young who finds his way past Greg Young. James Atkins actually diving onto the gravel at the back end, getting upset that he loses a couple of positions as a result of that, but is able to carry on, which is good to see. Meanwhile, Barry Clayton running quite comfortably in P6. Up the inside goes Matt Daly into P5 there, because Greg Young has had an utter disaster at Druids. He's facing the wrong way and is now all the way down in P10. Meanwhile, Alan Matthews in P6, looking like a bit of a cork in the bottle, it must be said, has a multitude of cars behind him. Meanwhile, Nathan Birch has found his way up into P2 owing to the misfortunes of other drivers, and he is looking quite comfortable there. It must be said, a fantastic start for him then. Meanwhile, Barry Clayton down in P6. Matt Daly finds his way up into P4. This is chaos. Positions being traded left, right and centre, which is good to see in this reverse grid race so far. Heading through the Hawthorne bend now then. It's going to stay fairly consistent for the time being, but the time being certainly isn't that long now as we head into the Westfield Corner. It looks to be all drivers taking advantage of the track limit. Well, not taking advantage of, but pushing the limits of the track limits, so to speak, before we dive through the right-hander there and enter the braking zone. Lock-up for Matt Daly once again. I said it in race 1, but the lockups don't seem to put a stopper on Matt Daly's very impressive pace so far in this race. John Cole has had even more of a disaster start compared to Matt Daly. He's all the way down in P11 on the road, which is a shame because if we look at his pace at the moment, he is on for an absolute flyer. He is currently setting 2 purple sectors. Will Inglis has the fastest lap overall at 130.8, but that is about to be smashed by John Cole, I believe, as he comes across the line. It is a 130.1. 7/10 of a second quicker than the previous fastest lap of the race. He is absolutely flying. A bit of understeer there potentially through the Paddock Hill bend, but he still finds himself down in P11 on the road. Meanwhile, Matt Daly up into P3 now. He's found his way past Alan Matthews, and James Atkins dropping further back into P5 once again. He was given a bit of a lifeline there owing to the issues of some drivers at Druids, but has soon dropped back into the midfield once again. Still, if he can keep there, it will be very impressive and good to see some points on the board for James Atkins as well. There is Guy Swarbrick. Actually, Guy Swarbrick, I believe, currently leading the AM running. Yes, he is in P7 on the road under pressure from Rosie Hudson, though. In fact, we have a bit of an AM train forming up here between Rosie Hudson, Jack Hudson and Guy Swarbrick as we head into the right-hander of Hawthorne now. Rosie Hudson. I believe there was a bit of a lock-up from it. I couldn't quite make out who it was from. There was a lock-up from someone there, as all drivers cutting a bit of grass there, doing the groundskeepers a favour. And it is still Guy Swarbrick who leads this train of cars now. This train of 4 cars actually, and there in the distance is John Cole. John Cole will be caught up in this as well. This is either going to be a boon for him in this race. I tell you what, Guy Swarbrick isn't going to catch that, unfortunately for him. The back end getting unsettled on the dip in the track there on the entry into that is the entry into Stirling's there. The track kind of cambers away, and that can upset the back end, and it certainly has. He's now in P11 on the road and drops further back in the running, still on with a chance at the podium potentially, but now that is really going to put fire under John Cole now as he head into the Paddock Hill bend, because he's now in P10 on the road. If he can get ahead of these 3 cars that are potentially going to be enjoying a bit of a battle here, he can soon be gifted some position potentially based on how that battle goes. He has had to work his way past Nathan Birch. That is not Nathan Birch, rather, that is Jack Hudson. He has had to work way past him on merit and has done so. He's now P9 on the road and now has his sights set on Greg Young, but Greg Young, I imagine, isn't going to give up without a fight. He is a fellow pro runner and doesn't want to trade positions with him quite so easily. Meanwhile, at the front of the field, we have Matt Daly, currently setting personal best lap if all things go well for him as he heads through the Hawthorne bend. It is a purple sector 1. Let's see what it is through sector 2. It is a personal best as well, so this should be a decent lap from him. His best lap at the moment, a 1:30.6, not quite near John Cole's impressive 1:30.1, but still very good nonetheless. As we see Greg Young now getting ahead of Rosie Hudson. That is because Rosie Hudson unfortunately has had a bit of a disaster. Whereabouts is that? That is on the entry into the Hawthorne bend. That has allowed Guy Swarbrick back up into P2 in the running, which he'll be very pleased about, I am sure. Guy Swarbrick will be, I'm sure, keen on getting some more points on the board in terms of the championship standings. We will give a brief update on that when we can, but that is certainly going to help him and certainly not going to help Rosie Hudson, as Matt Daly does set the fastest lap of the race so far, a 1:30.1, only just eclipsing John Cole's previous best. Nathan Birch sent the next car up the road for Matt Daly. If we compare their previous and current pace, well, we have Matt Daly's for reference at 1:30.1 on the last lap, and then Nathan Birch at 1:31.5. So Matt Daly should be fairly easy pickings for him. No offence, Nathan Birch, but Matt Daly is absolutely in a league of his own, I would say, so far in this weekend, this round of racing. And we have, all of a sudden, there seems to be quite the formation of cars building up here. Barry Clayton now leads a bit of a train from P10, or no, rather P8, through to P5. Because we have Barry Clayton at P5, then very close behind we have James Atkins, John Cole, and then Greg Young. And then, in fact, we have Jack Hudson as well, so down to P9, in fact. And meanwhile, Matt Daly has found a way past Nathan Birch. I think Nathan Birch may have had a bit of an error there, which has allowed Matt Daly past, but Matt Daly is setting a purple sector while doing so. He is very much on a charge to try and catch back up to Will Inglis. I'm not supposed to be biased at all. It is not my job to pick favourites, as James Atkins there, certainly Brands Hatch not a favourite of his, as he drops down to P11. What a shame. He started on pole and as soon dropped back through the running. What a shame that this race not going his way. Greg Young as well dropping back down to P8. I know I shouldn't pick favourites, and I'm not saying I'm picking a favourite, but I so want this race to go well for Will Inglis. Will Inglis has had some incredible pace all season, and really this hasn't worked the way that he would have wanted it to so far. He's down at the moment, and we will give a brief update on this. I'm using the old figures. Will Inglis is currently P10 in the Pro Championship running, and we know from all the other series, all the other seasons, that is not where he belongs. He deserves to be higher up. So I thoroughly hope that Will Inglis takes a decent chunk of points away from this weekend. I know I shouldn't be picking favourites, but it has been an absolute rollercoaster of a season for him, that is for sure. As we see John Cole trading positions with Barry Clayton, so it has been a slower charge through the field compared to the likes of Matt Daly, but a charge through the field nonetheless for John Cole, as he now finds himself in P5. Will be setting his sights on the likes of Nathan Birch before his nearest rival Matt Daly comes into view. Alan Matthews currently in P4, as I believe we have a bit of a time glitch going on because cars are trading positions that aren't supposed to be trading positions. As we see Rosie Hudson currently a bit of a cork in the bottle for the likes of James Atkins and Guy Swarbrick as well. So a bit of a battle forming up here as we see Alan Matthews has a disaster here. He's on the inside of the circuit. Where is this? This is on the run down towards Stirling's there. He has allowed Greg Young past, and that is not exactly what he needed in this race. Meanwhile, Matt Daly into the 129s once again. That was like his pole lap during qualifying, rather. Very impressive pace from him indeed. And that is what we like to see, because that is really quite an impressive feat to be matching your pole time in race conditions with a half a tank of fuel on board and half of your tyres worn out. Very impressive indeed. As we see Barry Clayton and Jack Hudson battling it out now. Jack Hudson doing a very impressive job of leading the AM running from P5 on the road, so comfortably in the upper end of the midfield of the pro runners, and he is leading the AM race. I believe we may see potentially. What is his score looking like at the moment? I can tell you his score at the moment is a C rating, so that may relegate him to the AM running for now, but very impressive indeed. And I believe as well we may see some changes at the halfway point of the series, where some drivers are promoted, some drivers are demoted. I believe we'll have to watch out for the likes of James Atkins potentially dropping back to the AM running, but we should see impressive pace from him in that series. He may enjoy that very much indeed, as it has just been luck of the draw for some drivers. I think unfortunately some unfortunate accidents have meant that their season hasn't quite gone their way, unfortunately, but that is part of racing. Jack Cotton still battling it out with Barry Clayton as well, trying to keep Barry Clayton at bay. A very difficult task, as we've seen on numerous occasions. So Willingless then still leading this race, but is certainly down on lap pace at the moment if we compare it. We nearly had another very, very even lap time once again from Willingless. Willingless, you were 7 thousandths of a second too slow, I'm sorry to report, because it's a 131.007. James Bond with you in that car then. And then we have Matt Daly, only 2.5 seconds behind our lockup for him as he heads into the Graham Hill bend, but he has just set a 129.9, his last a 130.4. He is closing in on Willingless, so there's going to be a bit of a battle to behold. That will be a very exciting battle indeed between those two drivers. Just hopefully Willingless doesn't end up on his roof on the inside of the circuit, as he has done on so many occasions so far this season. Who is on the medium tyres? We have no runners on the medium tyres in this race actually, so Steve Knight reverting back to the softs, deciding that the medium tyre isn't worth it really, and the soft tyre is enough to take you to the end of this race with decent pace as well. Very close mixed up field, of course, which is what this reverse grid race is designed to do, and it certainly has delivered. We have quite a close pack forming up between a number of drivers now. But now I feel like it is a good opportunity to give you a brief update on the championship then, live championship as it's, well, not as it stands in this race, but after race 1. It is Matt Daly who extends his lead, 208 points in the lead of the pro running. Then we have, in fact, let's see how we're going to do this. We will do this based on championship order at the moment, and we'll switch it up from race 1, as I believe Rob Whitney has been able to rejoin us. Actually, did Rob Whitney ever leave this session? I'm not sure if he did, but he is now ahead of Steve Knight either way, which is good to see you in the session regardless. Ahead of Steve Knight now for Rob Whitney, as he has got a bit of time to make up to the likes of James Atkins, has got half the race distance to do it though. It'll be interesting to see actually. We haven't seen too much from him in this race, or this weekend rather, owing to his issues in race 1. It'll be interesting to see what his pace is like, how he compares to his fellow AM runners. Actually, if we look at his rankings so far in the AM running, he is currently in P5 in the championship, so he could still take some decent points away from this catch up to Steve Knight if things go his way. Meanwhile, front end of the field, we will get back to the championship standings, but front end of the field, Matt Daly has closed up on Willingless. The gap now at 1.5 seconds. We will, in just a few moments' time, be enjoying a bit of a battle between those two cars. So I'll get on with my championship ordering then. It is Matt Daly who are on board at the moment, who leads 208 points. Then we have Alan Matthews, who's had a race to forget really in race 2, currently in P2, 147 points. Then we have John Cole, 102 points. He is enjoying a bit of a battle with Nathan Birch at the moment, who is his championship rival at the moment. So Nathan Birch wants to stay where he is. Nathan Birch currently in P4 on 76 points. He wants to try and close that gap to John Cole. So this defence really matters for him now as we head through the Clark curve. Then we have Greg Young, currently P7 on the road, P5 in the championship with 65 points. He jumps ahead of Barry Clayton now, jumps ahead of Andrew Brammer as well. Andrew Brammer in P6, then we have Barry Clayton in P7. He should jump ahead of Andrew Brammer by the end of this evening's proceedings though. And then we have James Atkins in P8 at the moment. He is under threat from the likes of George Brook, Battersby, Will Inglis if things go his way. In fact, Will Inglis, if things go his way in this race, will jump right back up to whereabouts he belongs in this season's standings, as James Atkins has Guy Sawbrick for company at the moment. And then we go on board with Will Inglis. Will Inglis currently in P10. We give a brief mention to him. We have to watch out for the fact that Matt Daly is only 7/10 of a second behind him though. And then we see John Baker. John Baker not with us this evening, currently on 14 points in P11. And Andrew Whitehead currently in P12 on 2. And then we have Jack Hudson rather, as we see Barry Clayton getting ahead of Jack Hudson. That is an important overtake for Barry Clayton, and maybe he can capitalise on some errors at the front end of the field towards the end of this race. And he's within a shout of a podium, that is for sure. As we go on board with Jack Hudson, we note that in the background Greg Young and Alan Matthews are battling it out there, as John Cole has found a way past Nathan Birch now. Nathan Birch then will not, unfortunately for him, close up that gap in the championship standings. And Greg Young and Alan Matthews, as we've seen them battling so many times before, are having a bit of a scrap, it must be said, as we head down through Clearways. They are near enough side by side. This is fantastic racing from these two cars. So as we head down towards the Clark curve, it is going to be Alan Matthews has had the inside line there, right over the curb, up onto two wheels. That cost him a bit of pace, had he all suffer down the Brabham Straight. And there we see Greg Young securing the position for now, but for how long? James Atkins meanwhile gets back ahead of Guy Swarbrick. So there we see Jack Hudson, currently the AM running leader, 168 points to his name. His nearest rival, Rosalie Hudson, who was leapfrogged ahead of the absent Paul Millman this evening. As it was in the previous season's touring car running, the siblings battling it out at the top end of the AM running, which is good to see. Barry Clayton's going a little bit wide there onto the grass. And then we have Rosie Hudson in P2, 121 points. Paul Millman, P3, 118 points. And then we have Steve Knight on 87 points. Rob Whitney will be hoping to close up that gap on in P5 at the moment. And then we have Guy Swarbrick also hoping to close up to the gap of Rob Whitney and Steve Knight currently in P6 in the standings, P11 in this race. Meanwhile, at the front end of the field, with 8 minutes to go, there is a battle forming up between Will Inglis and Matt Daly for the lead of this race. And it is going to be very exciting indeed. Yes, only half a second between these two now as we head down the Brabham Straight. Is it going to be getting closer? I don't think so on this occasion. Very close indeed. Will Inglis has turned up the ante, that is for sure. Has responded to the threat of Matt Daly behind. A lock up from him though as we headed into the Paddock Hill bend. Here is Druids. Will Inglis positioning his car absolutely perfectly there. Doesn't want to go too far to the inside because that's just going to tempt Matt Daly to the outside. Likewise, doesn't want to leave the door open because he'll just swoop past. Positioning his car just right there on the middle, blocking as much as he can, making that Juliet TCR as wide as physically possible. Is it enough though as we head into Surtees? Matt Daly looks up the inside, defending well though by Will Inglis. Will Inglis certainly knows how to defend. We've seen it on so many occasions. One of his most impressive defences for me was probably Silverstone recently, although I've lost count of which season of Silverstone. I've done quite a number of seasons now of this. You think I'll be getting better at my job, but unfortunately I'm not. I'm just enjoying the racing as much as I hope you ladies and gentlemen are. As we see, meanwhile, Greg Young and Alan Matthews still battling out. Greg Young getting ahead of Alan Matthews for the moment. Can he make it stick as the exit Surtees? Now, I think we'll have to tune back into that battle as they head down the Pilgrim's Drop, as the position's not changing between the two front runners here. Heading down the Pilgrim's Drop, then it is Alan Matthews who enjoys the slipstream of Greg Young up in front. Heading through the right-hander, then it is Greg Young who will be fairly comfortable at the moment, and by fairly is as it was a race one, a relative term, because they are only 0.3 of a second apart. Goes wide, does Greg Young. That may cost him now, as we're going to go back on board with what is going on for the lead of the race now as we go through the Brabham Straight. It is still Will Inglis who leads, slower and slower though, these two slowing each other up in the midst of battle. There's about 0.2 of a delta between them though, only 0.2 of a second between them on this lap as well. As we head into Druids once again, Will Inglis defending the inside there, but Matt Daly is very much keeping him in check now. Heading through the left-hander of the Graham Hill bend, Matt Daly just looks to be a little bit more comfortable on track, I would say. Seems to be able to carry just that little bit more speed, and it is Will Inglis who has it all to do, really. That that gap builds up ever so slightly. Meanwhile, further in the midfield, running Barry Clayton seems to have had a bit of an issue because of a multitude of cars have just found their way past. Alan Matthews and Greg Young still battling each other. Jack Hudson in P5, very impressive to be leading the AM race from P5. Meanwhile, the two leaders still battling it out. How long can they keep this up? How long can they be oh so close to each other? We have seen time and time again exciting battles like this are successful and do go very well, but we have seen on the odd occasion where it just goes all so wrong for these drivers. Speaking of going wrong, there is Steve Knight having a bit of an issue there. Luckily, these two are able to avoid it with no real challenge, and they carry on to clearways once again. Only a tenth of a second now separating them. They must be side by side at this point. Not quite. Is Matt Daly going to be a little bit later on the brakes? He can't quite get it done this time. Ryan's going to switch back for the inside there on the exit of the Clark curve, heading down the Bradman straight now. Will he have the inside there? No. Will Inglis able to defend. He's going to try and go the long way around. Very brave indeed. Can he make it stick? There's going to be a lock up there as we head into the Paddock Hill bend, and he's going to be sticking to his inside, I'm sure, as we head down towards Druids now. I am wrong, actually. My predictive commentary not quite good enough. He's going to have to stay behind for the time being. Just want to give brief mention, by the way, if you haven't watched it already, the latest episode of the Alfa Romeo Owners Club podcast with Guy Swarbrick features the commentating wisdom of actually what is going on there. There, I believe we've just had a position change. No, we haven't. There is just a huge number of cars. It is Alan Matthews who heads through Druids now, has Jack Hudson for company. Jack Hudson losing back, was a P5 just a moment ago. What's going on the front end here? We have Will Inglis only a tenth of a second behind, or ahead of Matt Daly rather, and there's contact between the two. That is a substantial accident. I'm not quite sure if he just didn't see him in his mirrors there, didn't realise just how close he was. That is now Will Inglis in the gravel, and Matt Daly is able to carry on without losing too much time there. Will Inglis be able to carry on without losing too much time? That is a disaster for Will Inglis. He led this race for so long, now finds himself in P3. I mentioned he's just not been able to collect points this season, and that seems to be the case once again. Matt Daly slowing down. Meanwhile, maybe he feels like that was his fault, which is very courteous of him, and is a very excellent racecraft, really. It is very kind of him, but in doing that, he has not been able to give Will Inglis the lead of the race back, because John Cole now leads this race in all of this. I'm not sure he expected this. I certainly didn't. What an impressive drive from him so far. After just sitting comfortably in P3, he now finds himself leading this race as Matt Daly finds his way back past Will Inglis now into the Paddock Hill bend. I'm not quite sure what to make of that last lap. That is from carnage in the midfield to utter disaster and a rollercoaster of emotions at the front end of the field there, as we now see Will Inglis very much has Matt Daly for company now. Another lock-up through the Graham Hill bend, and he also has Nathan Birch for company. Nathan Birch, don't count him out for a spot on the podium in all of this as well. If the battle continues on and unfortunately doesn't go the way that we would like to see it, he could be within a shout of a podium here. But John Cole looking quite comfortable in the lead of this race, which is not what I was expecting to happen. If you'd asked me just a lap ago, it was here where it all went wrong for the previous race leaders. As we see, about 4 seconds off the lead of this race, the battle for P2, which is effectively what this is raging on. Matt Daly finds his way past Will Inglis now. I'm sure there's a substantial amount of damage on these drivers' cars now, the cars of Matt Daly and Will Inglis. Will Inglis dropping back now. Nathan Birch does find himself with a spot on the podium. That is very impressive indeed. Just like John Cole, capitalising on other drivers' mistakes, and he has been rewarded for his excellent racecraft. Meanwhile, in the midfield battle, which we were trying to have a look at before, it all went wrong at the front end of the field. We see that Greg Young finds himself in P6 now. Alan Matthews had broken away a little bit now for P5, so he has recovered a decent race from this. Jack Hudson finds himself in P7, Barry Clayton P8 as well. Nathan Birch battling out with Will Inglis potentially. No, the gap has built up fairly substantially, so looking quite comfortable then for the legs of Matt Daly, Nathan Birch and John Cole. The person to lose out most in that, I would say, is Will Inglis. His run of misfortune continues on in this season, and he will take away a decent haul of points, but not as many points as he could have came away with this weekend. Meanwhile, Jack Hudson potentially under pressure from Barry Clayton towards the end of this race. It won't make a difference to his AM race, which he is leading by quite a number of seconds, but he, I'm sure, would like to come home ahead of as many cars on track as possible. Just want to give brief mention to our earlier topic of conversation. It feels like an eon ago, but of course, if you haven't watched it already, episode 63 of the Alfa Romeo Owners Club podcast with Guy Swarbrick and Tom Brooks in the commentary business. A very, very interesting, especially for me, very interesting episode to watch. He gives insight into his career and his very, very nice sounding 147 GTA on that episode, so tune in if you haven't already. And just a little bit more admin before the end of this race. We do, of course, have Sunday's fun race coming up. This is mainly for fans of the series or competitors as well, and this week's Sunday fun race will be in memorial for John Dooley. Of course, we tragically lost John Dooley, avid Alfa Romeo fan, racer, and Alfa Romeo Owners Club member. We lost him 2 years ago this year, and we will be holding a memorial race for our Sunday fun race this Sunday with GTV6s and 75s as well, and that will be streamed on the channel. I was tempted to take part, but I think we'll be streaming instead, which should be an enjoyable evening and a thoroughly suitable memorial, I think. Would be very nice to see as Adam Matthews finds his way into P5. It has a bit of a battle with Greg Young, but that seems to be not quite over yet, but the positions haven't changed just yet. Meanwhile, we are now on the penultimate lap of this race. John Cole leading then about 4.5 seconds ahead of Matt Daly after a lead of this race that has been gifted to him, really. I mean, he did deserve it because he had no issues in the race and has just been quietly sitting on the outskirts of the podium, and has now found himself in the lead of this race. Very well deserved indeed, but it was just a bit of a roller coaster of emotions there, I'm sure, for a number of drivers and for myself in this race. As we see Alan Matthews then forming a bit of a train behind him now. He is from about P4 down to P8. We have occupying or P5 down to P8 rather, occupying this bit of the circuit. The back end on the exit of Stirling's, they're getting away from him. That is going to cost him quite a substantial amount of time and momentum heading down clearways there. He's going to try and fight back though, late on the brakes. Can he get that position back? He may be able to there, although Greg Young will have the inside of the track for the run down the Brabham Straight. This is going to be very exciting heading into the Paddock Hill bend here. It is going to be Greg Young who has the inside line there and is further ahead actually, so should take the position now. I was worried about how long it was taking cars to enter the camera shot there if something had gone awry, but that doesn't seem to be the case as we go on board with John Cole here, just to see how he is controlling the race as we speak. Barry Clayton has found a way past Jack Hudson. Jack Hudson now down into P8, fairly clear of his fellow AM runners, but has unfortunately filtered towards the back of this train of cars here. As Alan Matthews still fighting back against Greg Young. This battle is going to go on until the very end. I fear there was contact between the two. Yes, there was. Barry Clayton finds himself in P7 now. Contact between Barry Clayton and Greg Young continues, and that is not what we want to see, unfortunately, for those drivers, as Greg Young rides over the curves. They're coming toward the end of his race now, towards the end of the race overall, in fact, and it will be a good haul of points for him, as Alan Matthews still leading this quartet, and very much under pressure from Greg Young, though. Greg Young's still going to try and work his way past at any given opportunity, but it is John Cole who we're going to focus on as he heads through the Clark curve and onto the Brabham Straight. It has been a fantastic drive, a flash of the headlights in celebration, well-deserved celebration as well. Congratulations, John, you take the race to victory. Matt Daly will be coming home P2 in the end. What a shame that it is P2 in the end for him, but not the P2 that he wanted, I am sure. Nathan Birch rounds out his evening with a spot on the podium. Fantastic drive from him. Likewise, Will Inglis, commiserations. It's still a decent haul of points, but not where you could have been after leading for so long. That really is a disaster for him. But Nathan Birch, I just want to give mention, a very impressive drive indeed. Alan Matthews will be eventually come home P5, very much under threat from Greg Young, who comes home P6. Jack Hudson takes the AM race victory with a P7 on the road, very impressive indeed. Barry Clayton P8 on the road, and then we have Rosie Hudson to take the second spot on the podium in the AM race. Congratulations, Rosie, for a good haul of points there as well. James Atkins will be coming home P10. Guy Swarbrick will be rounding out the podium in the AM race running in P11 on the road. Rob Whitney will be coming home P4 on the AM, P12 on the road, and then Steve Knight classified P13, P4 or P6 rather in the P5. Get my numbers right in the AM running. So that is certainly been a very exciting weekend here at Brands Hatch. Indeed, Brands Hatch always delivers. It always delivers some very exciting racing, especially in these touring cars. And I hope you've enjoyed watching it as much as I have enjoyed commentating it. So I'd hope to catch you in the week's time for the next round of the Formula Alpha series, in a fortnight's time for the next round of the touring car series, and on Sunday as well for our Memorial Sunday fun race. So plenty of racing action to look forward to. I'll catch you in just a few days' time. Thank you very much.